Do you remember the cheap Christmas dishes that once made the holidays feel full of love? They turned scraps into joy and struggle into celebration. When did we stop tasting what truly mattered? Cornbread dressing with giblets was the kind of dish that turned thrift into tradition. It started with the scraps, crumbled cornbread left from the week, mixed with chopped chicken livers, onions, and herbs pulled straight from backyard gardens. The scent of sage and broth filled the home long before the meal was ready, carrying the warmth of something earned, not bought. The giblets, boiled down to tender perfection, gave the dish a richness that spoke of making the most from what little there was. On Christmas Day, this was often the centerpiece, not because it was grand, but because it was shared. Families gathered around small tables and large pots, finding joy in the familiar taste of something humble. Cornbread dressing was not about luxury. It was about love stretched wide enough to feed everyone. Every bite carried memory, patience, and pride, the real flavor of the season. Molasses candied yams were sweetened by patience, not plenty. When refined sugar was too dear, families reached for homemade molasses or sorghum syrup to coat slices of sweet potato until they glistened like amber. The yams simmered slow in cast-iron skillets, bubbling under a glaze that filled the kitchen with a smell deep as memory. They were tender, caramelized at the edges, and sticky enough to make every bite feel like dessert and blessing at once. Molasses brought something that sugar never could, a smoky sweetness that felt ancient, earthy, and whole. These yams were served alongside meat if there was any, or eaten plain from a spoon when there wasn't. They were comfort, made from soil and struggle alike, proof that sweetness could be drawn from even the hardest ground. In every spoonful was history cooked down to syrup and flame. Collard greens with ham hocks were the soul of Christmas cooking long before anyone called it soul food. A pot of greens simmered all day on the stove, the smoky meat from leftover ham bones slowly melting into the broth. Each leaf softened into silk, soaking up the flavor of salt, smoke, and thyme. The rich scent wrapped itself around the house, promising something steady and strong. Collards were more than food. They were ritual. On Christmas Day, they stood for good fortune, health, and survival. Every family had their own way, a pinch of pepper here, a spoon of vinegar there, each pot telling a story passed down in taste, not words. When served with cornbread to soak up the potlikker, the meal became a full blessing. Collard greens and ham hocks fed more than hunger. They fed heritage. Sweet potato tea cakes were the taste of Christmas love, hand-shaped and baked with care when pie fixings were too dear. Mashed sweet potatoes took the place of expensive butter, giving each cake a soft golden hue and a sweetness all its own. The dough was mixed in big wooden bowls, rolled out on floured tables, and cut into circles by jar lids or tin cups. When they came out of the oven, the air turned rich with spice and sugar. These little cakes were passed around in napkins at church socials or packed for neighbors as gifts. Each one told a story of resourceful joy, how something so simple could still feel special. Children waited by the stove for the first warm bite, soft and fragrant in their hands. Sweet potato tea cakes were humble and heavenly, proof that love could rise even without plenty. Turkey necks and rice gravy made sure no part of the bird went to waste. Once the holiday turkey had been carved, the necks were simmered down with onions, celery, and a touch of flour until the broth thickened into a dark, flavorful gravy. Poured over rice, it became a meal in itself, simple, filling, and rich with comfort. The meat from the necks was tender, sliding off the bone like butter, and the gravy carried every bit of the bird's essence. In many homes, this dish was the quiet favorite, eaten the day after the feast when the celebration slowed but the warmth remained. It was food for resting hearts and tired hands, the kind that made you close your eyes after a long meal. Turkey necks and rice gravy turned leftovers into love, teaching that nothing was ever too small to be savored. Buttermilk cornbread pudding was the sweet ending to a long day's work, born from the habit of never wasting a crumb. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into a pan, soaked in buttermilk, sugar, and a few eggs, then baked until golden and bubbling at the edges. The result was soft and custardy, rich with tang and sweetness. Families who had little turned this into something extraordinary, a dessert that cost almost nothing but tasted like a celebration. Served warm with a drizzle of syrup or a spoon of butter, it filled the room with quiet joy. The flavor was simple, but the feeling was grand. Buttermilk cornbread pudding showed that the same bread that fed you through hard times could also bring comfort when the world finally slowed down. It was thrift turned into tenderness, poverty turned into pride, and warmth turned into sweetness. Chitterlings, known lovingly as chitlins, were not for the faint of heart, but for those who knew the value of patience and pride. These were the cleaned and boiled intestines of the hog, cooked down for hours until tender and fragrant. What some saw as scraps, others turned into delicacy, a meal shared on holidays to honor endurance itself. Preparing chitlins was an act of devotion, from the endless washing to the slow simmer with onions, vinegar, and spice. They filled homes with a smell that spoke of both hardship and heritage, a reminder that survival had its own flavor. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, they were more than food. They were history in a pot. On Christmas tables across the South, chitlins weren't just eaten, they were respected, a symbol of making beauty from what others cast aside. Molasses stack cake was the Christmas centerpiece that grew layer by layer, built not from luxury, but from love and labor. Each thin, golden brown cake was baked separately, its surface brushed with warm molasses or sorghum syrup before another layer was carefully added on top. When finished, it stood tall and proud, heavy with sweetness and meaning. Then came the hardest part, waiting. For several days, the cake sat wrapped and resting, the syrup slowly soaking into every layer until the texture turned moist and tender, the flavors deepened, and time itself became an ingredient. Families baked it together, often with each person responsible for one layer, transforming the act of dessert making into a ritual of togetherness. The taste was bold, smoky, and sweet, carrying the flavor of hearth and patience. It was more than food. It was a story of endurance, of hands working side by side, of sweetness that came slowly but stayed long. Molasses stack cake reminded everyone that celebration was not about haste or wealth. It was about care layered over time, one thin circle of love after another. Turnip green potlikker soup was the quiet strength of the table, a dish that came not from what was served first, but from what remained after. When the tender greens were eaten, the broth that simmered beneath them, the potlikker, was saved like treasure. It was dark and smoky, heavy with the flavor of ham bones, onions, salt, and earth. Mixed with a bit of cornbread, rice, or stray vegetables, it became a nourishing soup that soothed hunger and offered comfort. In the old days, elders called it liquid gold, rich not in coins, but in care. It carried nutrients, yes, but also a promise that nothing made with love should ever go to waste. During the cold weeks after Christmas, families gathered around small bowls of potlikker, sipping warmth that stretched far beyond its ingredients. Each spoonful was humility and hope combined, a quiet meal that spoke volumes about wisdom and endurance. Sweet rice pudding with raisins was Christmas comfort at its most gentle, a dessert born from thrift and turned into grace. Leftover rice was simmered again in milk until creamy, with sugar, butter, and cinnamon stirred in to bring it to life. Plump raisins softened in the heat, releasing their sweetness into the mixture, while the scent of nutmeg or vanilla filled the air. The pudding thickened slowly, stirred by careful hands that had learned to measure not with cups, but with instinct. Served warm in simple bowls, it was dessert that asked for quiet, for gratitude, for the slow savoring of every spoonful. It tasted of simplicity, of love that didn't shout but lingered softly. For children, it was a treat. For elders, a memory. Sweet rice pudding was more than a way to use what was left. It was proof that comfort could come from the smallest acts of care. In every creamy bite lived peace, patience, and home. Hogmaw and Cabbage was the kind of meal that turned survival into something soulful. Made from the pig's stomach, cleaned and stuffed or stewed with greens, onions, and cabbage, it stretched humble ingredients into abundance. Every step took patience, washing, boiling, seasoning, but the result was rich and filling, flavored with the smokiness of salt meat and the sweetness of long cooking. It wasn't fancy, but it fed a crowd, especially during the Christmas season when families gathered in small homes with big appetites. The cabbage soaked up every bit of flavor, soft and savory, while the Hogmaw added a chew that reminded everyone of the work behind each bite. Dishes like this were born of necessity but shaped by love, created by hands that refused to let anything go to waste. Hogmaw and cabbage wasn't just dinner. It was a celebration of endurance, thrift, and the beauty of making do. Bread pudding with cane syrup was the dessert that proved nothing, not even stale bread, was ever truly lost. Pieces of leftover loaves were soaked in warm milk, beaten eggs, and a heavy drizzle of homemade cane syrup until they softened into something new. The mixture baked slowly, filling the room with a smell deep and sweet enough to make mouths water long before it was ready. Once out of the oven, it was sticky, tender, and golden on top, like sunshine trapped in sugar. For families who could not afford store-bought sweets, this was luxury in a pan. The cane syrup gave it a depth that regular sugar never could, a taste of smoke, soil, and patience. Every bite carried the memory of hands stirring, saving, and savoring. Bread pudding with cane syrup was warmth made edible, a Christmas comfort born straight out of resourcefulness and love. Fried fatback with gravy was the breakfast that started Christmas morning with sizzle and salt. Thin strips of cured pork belly were fried until crisp, their edges curling in the hot skillet. The drippings were saved, always saved, and whisked with flour and milk to make a rich, creamy gravy poured over biscuits or rice. It was the taste of indulgence in a world that rarely offered much of it. The crackle of the fatback and the smell of the gravy meant that Christmas had truly begun. Children gathered close, watching the pan and waiting for their turn, while grown folks shared stories of the year gone by. Fatback might have been scraps to some, but to those who knew its worth, it was a feast in itself. Every crisp bite and creamy spoonful told a story of pride, patience, and Southern ingenuity. Boiled custard was a dessert meant to comfort the spirit as much as the body, a soft and soothing sweetness that wrapped around the senses like a blanket. Made from milk, sugar, and eggs beaten until pale, it was cooked gently on the stove, whisked slow and steady until thick enough to coat a spoon without curdling. If vanilla or nutmeg could be spared, they were stirred in last, their fragrance filling the kitchen like warmth itself. Too rich to drink and too delicate to slice, boiled custard occupied a tender middle ground between milk and pudding, a texture meant to be savored slowly. It was often poured into mugs and sipped by lamplight, steam curling in the air as families sat together after long days. On Christmas nights, it replaced eggnog for those who had no cream to spare, yet it offered the same joy and calm. Every spoonful was peace after hardship, sweetness earned through patience and care. It was the kind of dessert that didn't shout for attention. It whispered comfort, carrying memories of home, of togetherness, and of the quiet grace that makes ordinary things feel sacred. Boiled custard was Christmas distilled into warmth and kindness, proof that gentleness could fill a cup. Field peas and rice, better known as Hoppin John, was more than a meal. It was a wish cooked into being. On the surface, it was simple. Black-eyed peas simmered slowly with onions, a bit of salt pork or ham hock for flavor, and spooned generously over rice. But each ingredient carried meaning. The peas stood for coins, the rice for abundance, and if greens were added, they symbolized wealth and growth in the new year to come. Families believed that eating it on Christmas or New Year's Day would bring luck, but it was the taste, smoky, earthy, and deeply satisfying, that made it beloved. The scent of simmering peas filled the home long before the first bowl was served. It was cheap to make but rich in comfort, a dish that turned thrift into celebration. For those who had little, it offered the promise of more. For those who had plenty, it was a reminder of humility. Hoppin John was food that bridged hope and hunger, linking every year to the next with a spoonful of faith. Cabbage and smoked sausage stew was what happened when wisdom met hunger and turned necessity into nourishment. In many kitchens, just one link of sausage was enough to flavor an entire pot, its smoky saltiness seeping deep into the tender folds of cabbage and the soft cubes of potato below. Everything simmered slowly on the stove through the afternoon, filling the home with a smell that felt like safety itself. For Christmas, this humble stew took on special meaning, a dish that stretched small portions into abundance, gathering families around steaming bowls and simple gratitude. The broth was rich without being heavy, each bite balanced between spice and sweetness, softness and strength. No one left hungry, no matter how modest the table. The stew reminded everyone that good food was not about excess, but about intention, about patience and care. Every spoonful carried the echo of firewood crackling, hands stirring, and voices laughing nearby. Cabbage and smoked sausage stew was proof that celebration does not come from wealth, but from the warmth that fills a kitchen when people share what they have. Apple Brown Betty was a dessert that turned leftovers into legacy. Slices of tart apples were layered between crumbles of old bread, drizzled with molasses or sorghum syrup instead of refined sugar. As it baked, the bread soaked up the syrup and juice, becoming dark and caramelized around the edges. Served warm, it was crisp on top and soft beneath, a perfect balance of texture and taste. For many African American families, this was a Christmas treat, simple, sweet, and deeply nostalgic. It carried the smell of hearth and home, of cinnamon and care. Apple Brown Betty proved that even the humblest ingredients could rise to something beautiful. It was a dessert that didn't just fill bellies, it filled hearts too, turning old bread and fruit into comfort. In its sticky sweetness lived the story of survival sweetened by love. Sweet potato pie with cornmeal crust was the true heart of the Southern table, baked with love long before store-bought crusts ever appeared. The filling was made from mashed sweet potatoes whipped smooth with sugar, milk, and a hint of nutmeg or cinnamon, then poured into a crust of cornmeal and lard. That crust was golden and gritty, firm enough to hold but tender enough to crumble under a fork. As it baked, the scent of caramelized sweet potatoes and roasted corn filled the house, mingling with the sound of laughter and the hum of family gathering near the stove. This pie was both memory and meal, a creation born from the soil itself, made from two humble crops that had carried people through both hard times and harvests. It was a dish that did not need wealth to feel rich. Each slice offered sweetness that came not from sugar, but from care, from skill, and from the pride of feeding others. On Christmas tables, it gleamed like amber in the lamplight, a symbol of home, resilience, and gratitude. Sweet potato pie with cornmeal crust was more than dessert. It was the story of survival turned into something beautiful. Cracklin cornbread was the sound and scent of Southern celebration, simple, hearty, and alive with flavor. The batter began with cornmeal, salt, and buttermilk, stirred smooth before being folded around handfuls of crispy pork cracklins, those golden bits left from rendering lard. When poured into a sizzling iron skillet, the mixture hissed and popped, the edges browning fast while the center baked tender and fragrant. The smell filled every corner of the house, smoke, salt, and sweetness in harmony. Pulled hot from the oven, it was sliced thick and served with cane syrup or honey, sometimes alongside collards or field peas. Every bite carried the crunch of the cracklins, the warmth of corn, and the satisfaction of something made from almost nothing. At Christmas, this cornbread became a feast in itself. Simple food transformed into comfort and pride. Cracklin cornbread was more than a dish. It was tradition sizzling in a skillet, a golden link between the past and the present, proof that flavor could rise from thrift and care. Stewed okra and tomatoes brought the memory of summer into the chill of winter kitchens. When gardens lay bare and fresh produce was only a memory, jars of okra and tomatoes, carefully canned during warm months, were pulled from shelves like treasures. They were simmered together with onions, peppers, and sometimes a touch of bacon grease, bubbling until the stew thickened into something rich and comforting. The okra's gentle stickiness turned the tomatoes silky, giving the dish its signature texture, smooth, savory, and full of life. The color alone, deep red mixed with green, was enough to make a table feel festive, like Christmas painted in food. Served beside rice or a slice of cornbread, it warmed bellies and spirits alike. Stewed okra and tomatoes was never about luxury. It was about wisdom, about saving the best of the earth and making it last. Each spoonful was the taste of sunlight captured in a jar, a promise that even in the coldest season, the memory of warmth and work could live on through food. Cane syrup popcorn balls were Christmas joy shaped by hand, sweet and sticky in a world where candy was rare and store-bought treats were out of reach. They began with plain popcorn, popped over a hot stove in iron pots that rattled and hissed as kernels burst to life. Each bowl of white puffed corn waited for its golden crown. Warm cane syrup poured in slow ribbons, coating every piece until the air smelled of caramel and smoke. Hands greased with butter worked quickly, pressing the sticky mix into balls before it cooled. It was messy work, but the kind that filled the kitchen with laughter and chatter. When the candy hardened, it shone like amber and cracked gently between teeth, sweet enough to make a child's eyes light up. These popcorn balls were handed out after church programs or shared at home on Christmas Eve, small tokens of community and care. They weren't bought from stores. They were made with love, time, and just enough syrup to bind everyone together. Homemade molasses taffy pulls were less about candy and more about connection. On Christmas night, when the chores were done and the fire glowed low, families gathered around iron pots bubbling with dark, fragrant molasses. The syrup was boiled to just the right stage, then poured onto buttered pans to cool until it could be handled. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, took a turn pulling the sticky taffy, stretching, twisting, and folding it until it turned from brown to golden, smooth and glossy. The sound of laughter mixed with the crackle of the fire, and the sweet smell filled the room. It was a game, a treat, and a ritual all in one. Fingers stuck together, faces glowed, and worries melted away for a while. When finished, the taffy was rolled into ropes or small candies, wrapped in wax paper, and saved for later or given to neighbors. Molasses taffy pulls were more than sweets. They were the taste of togetherness and joy made by hand. Pig ear sandwiches were proof that nothing went to waste in a kitchen where every scrap had purpose. The ears were cleaned carefully, boiled for hours until tender, then fried to a golden crispness that crackled at the edges and chewed soft in the middle. Served on white bread with mustard or hot sauce, they carried a flavor deep as smoke and history itself. For many, it was the taste of home, born from necessity but remembered with pride. During Christmas gatherings, when the choicer cuts were long gone, pig ear sandwiches kept the celebration going late into the night. People gathered around the stove, swapping stories as grease popped and laughter rose. Each bite told a story of endurance, creativity, and gratitude for what the land and labor could provide. Pig ear sandwiches were not luxury food, they were legacy food, a reminder that dignity and flavor can thrive even in poverty's shadow. Rice cakes fried in lard were born from wisdom and waste-not cooking. Cold rice from yesterday's meal was mixed with cornmeal or flour, sometimes with an egg if one could be spared, and shaped into small, flat cakes. Dropped into bubbling lard, they sizzled until their edges turned crisp and golden while the centers stayed tender. The smell filled the house, simple, savory, satisfying. Served hot with a drizzle of syrup, molasses, or gravy, they turned meager leftovers into something to look forward to. On Christmas mornings, when the kitchen was alive with sound, these cakes came to the table beside scrambled eggs, salt pork, or even sweet preserves. They weren't extravagant, but they felt like a feast, a small miracle spun from thrift and care. Rice cakes fried in lard taught a quiet lesson, that love and resourcefulness could turn even a handful of cold rice into a meal worth remembering. Blackstrap molasses cookies were the dark heart of Christmas baking, chewy, spicy, and rich with history that stretched across generations. The thick, bittersweet molasses gave them not only color and depth, but also a sense of place, a reminder of fields and mills where the syrup first began. Into that dark richness went cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, each spice a whisper of warmth and memory. The dough, heavy in the bowl, stuck to wooden spoons and flour-dusted fingers, shaped by hands that worked hard but still found time to create something sweet. When baked, the cookies filled every room with the scent of sugar-meeting smoke, a smell that clung to curtains and hearts alike. They were soft inside, sturdy outside, meant to last through the holidays or be packed into tins for neighbors and friends. Children would sneak them warm from the pan, their faces sticky with molasses and smiles. Every batch told a story of endurance, the kind of sweetness carved out of scarcity. In their darkness was comfort, in their simplicity, pride. These cookies were more than dessert. They were memory baked into spice and patience, carrying with them the unspoken truth that love always finds a way to rise, even in lean times. Fried catfish nuggets brought the river straight to the table, their golden crust glistening like sunlight on water. When meat was too costly and game too scarce, fishing became salvation, and catfish was the prize. Early in the morning, men cast their lines from the banks or small wooden boats, bringing home enough to feed the whole family. The fish were cleaned by hand, each piece dipped in seasoned cornmeal and dropped into a cast-iron pot of hot oil that hissed and popped like music. The smell drifted for miles, warm, salty, and comforting. Once fried, the nuggets were crisp outside, tender within, eaten by the handful or dipped into spicy sauce. For Christmas dinners in riverside towns, this dish replaced turkey, yet no one felt they were missing a thing. It was fresh, familiar, and full of flavor born from work and gratitude. Served with coleslaw or cornbread, it turned even the simplest home into a feast. Fried catfish nuggets weren't just food. They were a symbol of ingenuity, the art of finding plenty in what the land and water offered freely. Every bite carried the taste of resilience and celebration. Boiled sweet potatoes with butter drizzle were the purest expression of comfort. Simple, sweet, and shining with care. Peeled and simmered in iron pots until tender enough to yield to a fork, the potatoes were laid out on chipped plates, their golden orange flesh glowing in the candlelight of small kitchens. Melted butter, or sometimes a spoonful of cane syrup, was poured over the top, pooling into every crevice until the air smelled like warmth itself. This was food that required no recipe, only attention and love. It was eaten slowly, savored between conversation and quiet gratitude. For families with little, it was proof that nourishment didn't need extravagance. On Christmas, these potatoes sat beside greens or salt pork, turning a humble table into something sacred. The taste was gentle but lasting, sweetness that came not from sugar, but from care. In every soft bite was a reminder that generosity could be found even in simplicity, and that joy could live in the plainest meal. Boiled sweet potatoes with butter were not grand, but they were grace itself made edible. Wild plum jam tartlets were little treasures made from what the land gave freely, turning foraged fruit into sweetness that carried through the seasons. When wild plums ripened in the heat of summer, families gathered them from the edges of fields and fence rows, their tart skins staining fingers deep red. Those plums were boiled down with sugar and patience, stirred until they thickened into a glossy jam that caught the sunlight like stained glass. Stored in jars through the long months, that jam became a promise of warmth when winter arrived. By Christmas, scraps of pie dough or leftover biscuit dough were rolled thin and filled with a spoonful of that plum preserve, then folded and baked until the air filled with the scent of fruit and flour mingled together. They came out bubbling, their centers jeweled and edges browned, each one small enough to vanish in 2 bites, but rich enough to linger in memory. Shared during church gatherings or family dinners, they were a reminder that sweetness didn't come from wealth. It came from will, from time, from knowing how to make something precious out of what was freely given. Wild plum tartlets weren't just dessert. they were evidence that nature and nurture could meet in a single bite. Peanut brittle from roasted peanuts was a candy of patience, timing, and steady hands. It began with the scent of nuts roasting in the oven, their skins crackling and releasing a warm, earthy aroma that filled the house. Meanwhile, sugar syrup simmered on the stove, bubbling to just the right amber hue that signaled it was ready. Too soon, and the candy would never harden. Too late, and it would turn bitter and blackened. Into that fragile in-between moment went the peanuts, stirred until everyone glistened under its thin coat of syrup. The mixture was poured out onto greased pans, spread thin, and left to cool. As it hardened, it crackled and popped, breaking apart into glassy golden pieces that shone in the light. The taste was sharp, sweet, and nutty all at once. Simple ingredients transformed into something almost magical. At Christmas, bags of brittle were passed from hand to hand, wrapped in paper or cloth, each one a little gift made of patience and fire. Making it was as much about the process as the candy itself. A ritual of watching, stirring, and waiting that bound generations together. Every shard of peanut brittle carried the memory of laughter, the echo of wooden spoons against iron pots, and the sweetness that could only come from endurance. Homemade eggless spice cake was a miracle of thrift that still felt like celebration. Born in kitchens where butter and eggs were luxuries, this cake relied on molasses, oil, and water to bind the batter, with a touch of vinegar to keep it soft and tender. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove gave it its warmth, filling homes with a smell that felt like comfort itself. The batter, dark as caramel, was poured into square pans and baked slowly until the edges turned crisp and the center rose firm but moist. Once cooled, it was cut into generous squares, sometimes drizzled with syrup or dusted with powdered sugar if the pantry allowed. Its flavor was deep, earthy, rich, and faintly smoky from the molasses, offering satisfaction that lasted far beyond the last bite. This was a cake that belonged to the people who knew how to turn less into more, who understood that celebration didn't depend on plenty, but on persistence. During Christmas, it was shared freely, sent to neighbors, or served beside hot coffee after long days of work and worship. Every crumb spoke of community, creativity, and quiet resilience. The eggless spice cake may have been born from scarcity, but it became a dessert of dignity, a testament to the sweetness that endures through hardship. Collard greens with smoked turkey necks were the heartbeat of Christmas dinner, a pot of patience simmering slow and steady on the stove. When ham hocks were too expensive, turkey necks stepped in, cheap, smoky, and full of soul. The greens were washed again and again, stripped of stems, and piled high into the biggest pot in the kitchen. They'd cook down until tender, swimming in a broth that smelled like home. That potlikker, as elders called it, held every ounce of flavor, rich enough to dip cornbread in. Children would wander by, asking if the greens were ready yet, and mothers would smile, stirring slow with a wooden spoon. These greens carried the stories of generations, of making do and making it good. The turkey necks gave up their meat, melting into the mix until every bite held a taste of smoke and salt and care. By the time dinner was served, the air was thick with warmth, laughter, and gratitude. Cabbage and ham hock stew was a breakfast that filled both stomachs and spirits. Cabbage, inexpensive and abundant, was simmered with ham hocks until tender and flavorful. The broth became rich with the smoky, salty essence of the ham, while the cabbage absorbed every bit of taste. Potatoes, onions, or other vegetables were sometimes added to stretch the stew further, making it both practical and hearty. Families ate it hot in the morning, ensuring they had enough fuel for long days in the fields or at work. The dish was economical, making use of inexpensive cuts of meat that might otherwise be overlooked. Yet it carried pride too, as it transformed humble ingredients into something comforting and sustaining. Cabbage and ham hock stew showed the ingenuity of African American cooks who knew how to bring depth of flavor from even the simplest foods. Though forgotten by many, it was once a breakfast that symbolized strength and tradition. Okra and tomato stew brought the warmth of West Africa straight to the American kitchen. Thick, tangy, and rich with spices. It was food meant to comfort body and spirit. The okra thickened the stew naturally, creating that signature texture that some loved and others teased, but everyone respected. Tomatoes, onions, and garlic simmered until their flavors blended into something both bright and deep. For many families, this dish connected them to a history that reached far beyond American soil. It was a link between past and present, memory and meal. Cooked slow in iron pots, it filled the house with an aroma that could stop conversations. Served with rice or cornbread, it soaked up every drop of flavor and told stories older than the holiday itself. It was a side dish, yes, but it was also history, survival, and celebration stirred into one pot. Every spoonful carried pride, patience, and the taste of home that no recipe could ever quite capture again. Molasses pound cake was the kind of dessert that didn't just sweeten the table. It told a story of making do with what you had. In many African American homes, especially throughout the South, refined white sugar was a rare luxury, and molasses became the flavor of celebration. Its deep, dark sweetness came from patience and endurance, echoing the same values that carried families through hard times. The dense crumb and rich spice were familiar comforts that filled kitchens with warmth even when money was scarce. Grandmothers measured ingredients by feel, not by cups, and poured in a sense of pride that can't be replicated from a recipe card. A slice of this cake meant togetherness, a sweet that could make even a modest Christmas feel abundant. The aroma alone brought children running, waiting for the moment the first slice was cut and the first crumb hit their tongue. Molasses pound cake wasn't just dessert, it was heritage baked into sugar and spice, reminding every generation that sweetness doesn't have to come from plenty. It can come from perseverance, too. Sweet potato biscuits brought sunshine to winter mornings. Their orange glow peeked from the oven, warm and soft with a buttery crust that crumbled at the touch. They were made from mashed sweet potatoes, one of the most treasured ingredients in African American kitchens, valued for their sweetness, their earthiness, and their ability to stretch a meal. On Christmas mornings, these biscuits were stacked high beside grits, eggs, or fried apples, brushed with melted butter or drizzled with honey. They smelled like the start of a good day. In times when sugar was scarce, the natural sweetness of the potato did all the work. Kneaded by hand and baked in cast-iron skillets, they carried the weight of care in every fold. Grandmothers taught children how to press the dough without overworking it, whispering small lessons about patience, family, and food as love. These biscuits weren't fancy, but they made every breakfast feel special. They were proof that beauty didn't need perfection, just heart, warmth, and a little time. Every batch was a promise that something good always waited at the table. Sweet potato biscuits didn't just feed families, they connected them. Macaroni and cheese baked in a cast-iron pan was a dish that never needed a reason to appear, but at Christmas, it was a promise fulfilled. Mothers mixed elbow macaroni with canned evaporated milk, margarine, and chunks of processed cheese, turning bare shelves into comfort. That cast-iron pan gave it soul. The edges browned just right, crispy and bubbling, the center soft and rich. It wasn't fancy cheese or gourmet technique. It was love measured in scoops. Kids hovered around the oven, waiting for that first golden crust to crack. It was creamy, cheesy, and filling enough to stretch one pan between a dozen hungry hearts. Each bite carried the warmth of care, the kind of meal that said, "You're home." It was never just a side dish. It was a centerpiece, a symbol of plenty made from very little. No holiday spread felt whole without it. Pickled pig's feet with rice was a breakfast plate that blended tang, tradition, thrift, and a powerful sense of cultural memory. Pig's feet were boiled, seasoned with spices, and pickled in vinegar, creating a dish that was both flavorful and long-lasting in households where preservation was survival. Served cold from jars or warmed gently on the stove, they were paired with rice, which balanced the sharp tanginess and made the meal hearty enough to carry people through long days of labor. For families with limited resources, this dish ensured that every single part of the hog was used and nothing valuable went to waste. The pickling process preserved the meat, allowing it to last far beyond what fresh cuts could manage in kitchens without refrigeration. Though the flavor was bold, tough, and not to everyone's taste, it carried strong roots in African American food traditions shaped by necessity and resilience. Rice added comfort, balance, and affordability, turning the plate into a full meal that could feed many. Pickled pig's feet with rice was not just food, but a cultural marker of thrift and endurance. Though rarely eaten today, it once stood as an important morning staple. Candied yams with orange zest and nutmeg were pure Christmas joy baked in a dish. The sweet potatoes glowed like amber under their syrup, each slice soft enough to melt under your fork. Butter, sugar, and spices blended together to make a glaze so rich it felt like celebration itself. The orange zest lifted it all, adding brightness to the deep sweetness, while nutmeg brought warmth that lingered long after the last bite. It was a dessert in disguise, yet a staple side in every holiday meal. Grandmothers made it by instinct, never measuring, just feeling when it was right. The bubbling syrup in the oven was a soundtrack to the season. It was served proudly next to ham, greens, and dressing, a dish that said abundance, even when times were tight. Candied yams were the taste of love, memory, and care baked into one perfect pan. When people talk about soul food, this is what they mean. Sweetness born from struggle, flavor carried through generations, and joy that glows from within. Pineapple. Upside-down cake was a burst of sunshine on cold December days. With its caramelized fruit rings and cherries shining like jewels, it brought color to tables that had seen too many brown desserts. Pineapple was exotic once, a prized treat that arrived in cans and made even the simplest home feel worldly. For African American families in the mid-century South, this cake was a symbol of hope and joy, a little escape baked right into tradition. The sugar on the pineapples bubbled into a golden glaze, seeping down through the sponge until every crumb was moist and bright. When flipped out of the pan, it was magic, sweet, glossy, and proud. Served warm, it reminded families that celebration didn't need to be grand to be beautiful. Pineapple upside-down cake was optimism on a plate, the promise of sweetness even in the leanest of years. Afro tree toppers stood as proud symbols of beauty, faith, and identity. Mothers molded angels with brown faces, coiled hair, and wings made from lace or fabric scraps. They painted each one by hand, giving them radiant smiles and halos cut from golden ribbon. Placed high atop trees, these angels shone under colored lights like guardians of joy. In a time when stores sold only pale-faced cherubs, these creations were quiet acts of love and defiance. Children looked up and saw themselves reflected in every feature, their pride glowing brighter than the lights below. Each year, the angel returned, sometimes patched, sometimes faded, but always cherished. It wasn't just decoration, it was representation made sacred. Neighbors admired them, guests asked where to buy one, but the answer was always the same: we made her. That truth gave the season its power. Those handmade angels transformed ordinary living rooms into spaces of dignity and belonging. Ground kudzu root paste emerged when conventional flours were scarce and starchy substitutes were needed to thicken stews or stretch breads. Kudzu, an invasive vine introduced from Asia, sent deep roots into the southern soil that stored abundant starch. Enslaved gatherers dug these roots, washed and dried them, then pounded them into a fine powder. Mixed with water, the powder formed a paste that thickened soups or acted as a binder for cornmeal cakes. Its mild flavor and reliable texture made it a quiet but important ingredient in times of scarcity. After emancipation, some rural families continued to harvest kudzu for its starch, and today herbalists still value it for its medicinal qualities. Ground kudzu root paste shows how knowledge of local plants and persistence in foraging allowed cooks to replace costly ingredients with what the land freely offered, turning an aggressive vine into a vital pantry staple, and demonstrating again how necessity inspired both culinary creativity and a deeper understanding of the southern landscape's hidden gifts. Canned peach cobbler was Christmas sweetness made easy. When fresh fruit was too expensive, mothers reached for those syrupy cans that glistened like sunshine. They poured the peaches into a baking dish, mixed sugar, flour, and a bit of cinnamon, then spooned biscuit dough right on top. As it baked, the syrup bubbled up around the edges, caramelizing into something golden and sticky. The whole house filled with the scent of fruit and butter and celebration. Served warm with a dollop of cream. If you had it, it tasted like summer remembered in the middle of winter. Even the simplest ingredients could turn into something unforgettable when stirred by love. Canned cobbler became the star of Christmas night, passed around between cousins with laughter and chatter, eaten straight from the pan when plates ran short. It wasn't about perfection. It was about joy, shared and steaming, one sweet spoonful at a time. Which old Christmas dish would you bring back? Tell us below, like the video, and subscribe to keep these memories alive.